Well, welcome everyone to our webinar today, Managed Metadata 201, Advanced Taxonomy in SharePoint 2010, 2013, and SharePoint Online. Today's webinar is jointly presented by Wand Inc. and Term Management. And my name is Mark Lair. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Wand, and with me is Mike Doane. He's the Principal at Term Management. Mike, I introduced myself on last week's webinar, but maybe you want to tell folks a little bit about yourself.
Hi everyone, this is Mike. Thanks for allowing us to present today. As Mark said, I'm the principal at Term Management. We've been around for about 3 years now. We do some work with customers, especially on the SharePoint taxonomy term store management capabilities on different projects. I've got some expertise in different areas, done a lot of work. We've also been building taxonomies outside of SharePoint for about the last 15 or more years. And I do a lot of work with intranets and portals. Mark?
Thanks, Mike. And just to jump back, just a little bit of background on Wand for those who didn't catch last week's webinar. We've been building taxonomies since 1983, and we're based in Denver, Colorado. And our primary business is providing off-the-shelf taxonomies, covering a wide variety of industry, vertical, and functional topics to help people jumpstart a taxonomy project in SharePoint or in other applications. And along with our off-the-shelf taxonomies, we work with guys like Mike to provide professional services to help customize the taxonomies or put together taxonomy plans or governance strategies, and we'll talk more about governance next week. And just as a reminder from last week, the way we provide our taxonomies is through access to our Wand taxonomy library, where you can get unlimited access to the complete library and really grab the components that you need to build up taxonomy in the term store for your SharePoint implementation. But with that, the rest of the webinar is really going to be educational, and our agenda today is we're going to talk about some more advanced features and advanced things you can do. Last week really gave a framework or a foundation of how to use the term store and how to manage terms. This week we're going to go a little bit deeper, so Mike's going to kick us off with some advanced term store features, including how to do custom sort of terms sets, walk you through the people term group and how that's used, and walk you through the search dictionaries term group. And after that, I'm going to take over and show you how to set up search refiners in the SharePoint search, so to use your managed metadata terms to enable people to do search and filter by those tags. We're going to talk about how to set up your site for managed navigation. It's really more of a 2013 in SharePoint Online feature. And then we're going to wrap up and look at the content search web part to show you ways that you can use managed metadata to present content dynamically on pages. And then we'll wrap up with a question and answer. With that, Mike, I'm going to pass it to you and go ahead and tell people about the custom sort.
Thanks, Mark. So I think the three capabilities that I'm going to demo in the next few minutes are some of the easiest ones to use out of the box. They're fairly easy to understand, and they're fairly easy to implement. And also, you could do them in a fairly short amount of time without the need for any sort of assistance. And I think Mark's going to talk about some more advanced features later in this hour. But first off, we can just talk about custom sort. And a custom sort is really easy to do. I found it useful in certain circumstances where you've got a short list of well-known terms that your end users are going to recognize, and instead of presenting them in alphabetical order, which the term store does by default, you can go ahead and customize that list to appear kind of like maybe clusters or sort of a natural order that your end users would recognize, so they don't have to sort through an alphabetical list. And I'll show you what that how that works right now. So Mark can jump over to a term set, and we'll go in and look at a term set here for content audience. So here we got a webinars term group, as you can see on the left-hand side, and the content audience term set we've got, and we put in advanced, basic, beginner, expert, etc. And those are alphabetized, alpha sort order, which SharePoint does, the term store does automatically. But if you click on the tab that says custom sort for that term set, which is the one in the middle there, you got two choices. The default order, which is according to the language, can be alphabetized. Or if you click on custom sort order, you can customize where or how those terms are going to appear, such that later when you go, say, tag a document, you can go ahead and have an order that users would recognize immediately. So in this case, we could reorder this, as Mark is doing right now, by how this list would appear sequentially, so to speak, to an end user that would make sense. So we can start with basic as 1, beginner is, I think the beginner is 1, basic is 2, intermediate 3, advanced, etc. So if Mark clicks save, and the term set will reorder itself after this process, you'll see that now the sort order is a little bit more what someone would expect. Beginner first, then basic, intermediate, advanced, expert, master. And if you went ahead and had some content that you wanted to apply, you've already got the site column set up, and you can see here on the far right, Mark has set that up, that when you went ahead and changed or edited the properties and wanted to add that tag, the order that it appears when you click on the labels makes a little bit more sense. Beginner, basic, intermediate, advanced. And it is a very simple way to sort of enhance a list. And when I say a short list, I think this list is about as short as you want to go. If you have larger lists, it's probably easier. I think one of the classic ways to think about this custom sort order is when you're given the option to choose a country in a drop-down list. And instead of the United States being way down the list near Uganda, for example, U.S. oftentimes is placed at the top because it's much easier to find. So I think in this case, if the list makes sense to your users and you can show what they're expecting, I think a custom sort order is fine. If you want to go back, you can always just flip back and say use default sort order again, and it'll resort the terms right back into that alphabetical order. So that's a very simple way to do a little bit of advanced feature work within a term set inside the term store for sort ordering. The next one I want to talk about is the people term group. And this pops up a lot when we're working with HR groups and they need folks to start self-identifying, like in edit your profile, and you want to start talking about, what department do you work in, what's your job title, where are you located. But this we'll show you in a second. These term sets allow you to control that with a lot more precision. Mark and I have worked on projects where the Sharepoint administrator has imported through Active Directory a list of departments, list of job titles, and sometimes those can be sort of intimidating and don't necessarily reflect how people are self-identifying with regard to what their job title is, or even their department and location. So these term sets are valuable because you can go ahead and create a controlled list for all those terms for that terminology. And what that does is it gives you a chance to control it so that, number one, folks aren't just using whatever term they want to use for the department that they're in or what their job title is. So you're controlling that list, which is good. It also allows you to extend it. So when the time comes and you want to add more job titles in there, or someone might suggest, hey, how come my job title's not in there? I was filling out my profile, editing my profile, and I didn't see my job title. You can go ahead and add that. So let's take a look at the term store and see what that looks like inside the term sets themselves for department, job title, etc. So Mark pops open, and it's down in, again, this is a default. As you open it up inside of your term store, you'll see people, you'll see the 3 term sets underneath that. You can see department, typical departments, job title, location. With the exception of sometimes, and I think we've seen this before, where the job titles and the departments will have a lot of extra material that most people might not recognize because of, say, a numerical code in front of it, or a funny name, or a really long job title, and all you need is a standard job title. So in this case, anybody on your staff can go ahead and as they're editing their My Profile, they can go ahead and choose from this controlled list. And I think since it's more user-friendly, if someone, say, for example, you incorporate a job title in a search, show me all directors who are in the Denver office. In this case, Mark would pop up, and you would see that. So this is a way to I think more seamlessly and with far more control include the ability for people to tag, self-identify inside of this people group. And again, this is for use inside of the, editing your own profile, or when an admin edits a profile for somebody who's working in a certain department. And I think Mark's going to show us here a demo of how this works. So you're going to go ahead and add a new profile. And Mark, you can also jump in here and just sort of walk through what you're doing. But here's an example of where instead of having to type in text, free text inside a department, you can go ahead and download there's a gap. You can see the familiar term, the terms from the icon here, and you just start typing in. You can see there's a job title. You can click on the labels, go straight to the term set itself, pick the preferred term for your department as an example. You can also scroll down one more, and you can see for location, office location.
There we go.
And that's where, again, you can have that controlled list that Mark's using for Denver. So it's a great way to control how people do self-identification for those three things. I've also seen cases where search has also been used, these have been incorporated into search, and search results pages have been built to filter through based on, again, like location or what the job titles are. It's very handy to have. We've worked on cases where we're doing searches for like an HR or an admin, or even recruiters doing a search for a certain type of person, job title, a certain kind of office. This can greatly enhance the findability of people once they self-identify.
Another thing I'll add, Mike, is you can take fields like skills and schools and interests, which by default are just free text field. You can actually go associate those to term sets as well. So that's a way you can take what SharePoint or what Microsoft has done with the people term group as kind of a starting set and expand that. So make sure people are using the same skills. Maybe they're using the same schools. Interests, maybe that's a better free text field. But it's another way that you can take managed metadata in the term store and deploy it out into your SharePoint environment.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we've also, Mark and I worked on projects where we did that skill taxonomies, which can get very extensive and large. And that'd be great to have that because oftentimes folks don't know how to, now I don't want to say correctly identify their skill sets, but uniformly identify their skill sets across the entire enterprise so that the same term is used to describe a skill set like C++, for example.
Yeah, I think a great example is I might say I speak Spanish and you might say just Spanish. And if those are free text keywords, we're now not saying the same concept versus if there's a taxonomy that says Spanish speaker or speak Spanish, whatever that preferred concept is. Now you can search through your employees or search through your colleagues and find everyone who speaks Spanish because we're all tagged to the same concept.
Yep, that's fantastic. Yeah, that's great. So that's a great example of using those people term group and term sets underneath there. And the last one I want to talk about before I hand it over to Mark is a little bit more, I don't know if you want to call it, say, esoteric. It's slightly more complicated to use and really to even understand. But it's this query spelling search dictionaries term set, which again is available by default. And the two main parts of it are inclusions and exclusions. And you can see here that these are just two flat lists. It won't recognize compound terms. You can really only you can enter a compound term. It's only going to recognize one term. And so single terms only is best. But the basic difference here is both of these have to do with how SharePoint Search uses did you mean. And so, everybody's aware now, let's say, if someone misspells a term, on search results page, you'll see the phrase did you mean, and then a link to a term, which might be the correct spelling, or at least a different spelling from what someone has entered. And so this is I guess, a finer grain way to control what your end users are going to see with that did you mean spelling. Inclusion basically means that you want to include this term. These are the terms that you want to include and you want SharePoint Search to point to as a did you mean. And we'll show you an example of this in a second. It'll make a lot more sense. But what you're really creating here is a list of terms that you want did you mean SharePoint Search to point to. And I'll show you that. Well, yeah, we can do it real quick here. So Mark scrolls down to search dictionaries, term group, and then get the company inclusion, exclusion. But we're talking about the query spelling and also the query spelling inclusion and exclusions. So let's talk about exclusions first, since it's first on the list. You can see the term purple there, P-U-R-P-L-E. That sounds like a standard spelling. And this is a little bit more, even more esoteric than inclusions. Inclusions is fairly easy to understand. But with exclusions, what we're talking about here is, and we came up with a use case where, let's say, for example, your company has a product, it's a product called Purple, but it's spelled P-U-R-P-Y-L, not P-U-R-P-L-E. In this case, if someone entered P-U-R-P-Y-L in search, you do not want SharePoint Search to say, did you mean P-U-R-P-L-E? Because it's going to say, hey, you misspelled purple. Did you mean purple? What we're saying here is exclude that term purple if someone types in this case, what would look like a common misspelling for purple. Don't do it. Just show them or show search results that have the term P-U-R-P-Y-L, not P-U-R-P-L-E. So in a sense, you're sort of telling the search, SharePoint Search, don't bother. If someone types in P-U-R-P-L-E, don't correct it with the term P-U-R-P-L-E, because it's not that's not what we want. Again, you can kind of sense this is a little far out there, but the sort of intentional misspellings of terms like that, common terms, is fairly common, I guess, in software, and that's just one use case. But in this case, you're saying, hey, dear SharePoint, if someone types in the search query P-U-R-P-L-E, don't ask them, did you mean purple P-L-E? It's just not. We just want to exclude that. Inclusion is a little bit different. So in this case, he's got avocado. These are kind of common, words that were probably commonly misspelled. In this case, Cincinnati. So if someone misspells the term query Cincinnati, what we're saying here is, yes, do show them this corrected term, the correct term Cincinnati spelled correctly. But we're actually controlling how SharePoint shows that term. So what we'll say here is, if someone misspells Cincinnati, please show them this term, which we're identifying as Cincinnati. So here you can see Mark has misspelled Cincinnati with 2 T's. Did you mean Cincinnati? Right there in blue. But that term would come from that term set. And I think it's just it's a way to control with a finer grain how SharePoint presents the did you mean relationship for an apparently misspelled term. So inclusion means includes the common term, in this case Cincinnati, the common spelling, the correct spelling, I should say. And exclusion, a little bit more esoteric, but in this case says don't bother showing them the correct spelling, because we want them to we want to have them see search results with that, in a sense, misspelled word. So, again, that's just 2 different ways to use it. There's a lot more I'm sure you can think of, and I'm sure you're probably asking questions right now on how to do that. But that's just an example of how that term group and those 2 term sets are used. Mark?
Thanks, Mike. So next topic is going to be managed navigation. Managed navigation is a pretty exciting new feature in the term store with SharePoint. And the way it works is it basically is allowing you to control the menu structure of your site using a term set, as opposed to in the past where you would have to sort of tediously create menu items and put pages in certain locations, so that the structure of the pages drove the structure of the site. Now with managed navigation, you can use the structure of a term set to drive the structure of a site. So here's an example on the left-hand side or of a site we set up for our webinar. And you can see the menu navigation on the left-hand side, and it's Managed Metadata 101 and 201, and we have topics underneath. These menu items are driven by a term set in the term store. Another thing I'd call out, benefit, is if you look at the URL. So as I hover over, if you look in the lower left, you're going to see the URL. These are much more user-friendly and also SEO-friendly URLs than you'd see with a traditional SharePoint page, which is really more database-driven. So here's custom sort. It's sharepoint.com/webinars/sandbox/managed metadata 201/custom sort. It's a very nice, much more friendly URL. If we go back to the term store, we can see the navigation that's been set up. So that the navigation of this site, this sub-site to be specific, is driven by these terms. So that's a really great feature. How do you set it up? I'm going to walk you through that. There's a few tips and tricks and things you should be aware of. So the first thing you want to do is you need to go to your site settings. And I have a new sub-site just called Managed Navigation Example that we're going to use to demonstrate that. And here I've set up pages, just pretty succinctly named, page A, page B. But I'll show you again the URL. If you look down at the bottom as I hover over, this URL is /managed metadata, managed navigation example /site pages /page B ASPX. Not quite as friendly. So the first thing to do is you want to go up to your site settings, and under look and feel, you're going to have this link called navigation. This is your first checkpoint. You might do this and say, hey, I don't have that navigation link. Why is it missing? Well, what you need to do is you need to turn on a certain site collection feature called the Sharepoint server publishing infrastructure. So if that's not turned on, what you need to go to your root site collection. So now I'm at my site collection root. I'm going to go to site settings there, so not at the sub-site, just to be clear. We're going to go to site settings. Under site collection administration, you're going to see site collection features. And now these are all the features. You're going to want to browse down to Sharepoint server publishing infrastructure. And here it is. You can see it's active. So if it's not active on your site, go ahead and click the activate button, and then you'll be set. So now you can go back to site settings and you'll have that navigation link. When you click on your navigation link, it's going to open up your navigation settings, and you'll have a few options. There's two differences, global versus current navigation. Global navigation is going to be across the top, and current navigation is going to be on the left-hand side. And then for each of those, you can decide, is it going to be structural navigation, and that's the default, or is it going to be your managed navigation? Or you can inherit navigation from the parent site. But basically your two choices are managed navigation versus structural navigation. Structural navigation, again, it's just going to be based on the structure of the pages that you've set up, and you can organize it this way. Structural navigation is going to be much more brittle. If you want to make changes, it tends to be more tedious, and you have a chance of breaking more links, and it's a little bit more difficult. So the managed navigation is really much more elegant. So we want to do managed navigation. First thing we want to do before we set this up in the navigation tab is we want to go back to our term store. And I've set up a new term set called Managed Navigation Demo. You'll see that it's down here in a local term group. So this is a term group that's specific to this site collection. You can do it that way, or you can do it up above on your regular term groups, your global term groups. It's going to work either way. But the first thing you need to do is click on the Managed Navigation Demo, so the term set name itself. And if we look at our topics, again, we're going to start to dig into what some of these different tabs are. We're going to go to Intended Use. And do we want to use this term set for site navigation? We want to check this box and hit Save. And now this term set is set up for site navigation, and you're going to see as we go through there's a new tab called Term Driven Pages. And so we go to our specific terms in the taxonomy, and this is page A. We're going to go up to first we're going to go to navigation. So there's two tabs you need to pay attention to. Navigation, you have a couple options that you can go through. The node title, this is how the title is going to appear in the navigation menu, so what the link is actually going to say. Here you can create some hover text, so if you want to mouse over and let people see some message from you, here I just say this is page A of my site. Pretty exciting. Next is your visibility in menus. Do you want this item to show up in global navigation, which again is across the top, or current navigation, which again is across the left, and you can do either. And then finally, the navigation node type. So this speaks to, one, you could just make it a simple link. So if you do that, it's going to drive the left-hand navigation based on your term set, but it's not going to give you those term-friendly, the SEO-friendly URLs that we looked at. So if you do that, you choose a page. If you click on it, it's just going to take you to that page. If you do the term-driven page, then what you need to do is establish, okay, we've set up those pages with a friendly URL. Now what should that page point to? And the way you do that is you go up to term-driven pages. And there's a mystery error message. So here we are at the term-driven page. If you want, you can customize the URL. So the URL does not have to match the menu item. If you want, you can make it say whatever you want. But now we're just going to set up a target page. So we're going to change the target page, browse. This one's actually already set up. But we're going to go, and you see I've set up all these pages, and we're just going to choose page A. One thing that's cool about the managed navigation, and again you get into the publishing infrastructure, is it can actually do cross-site publishing. So if I wanted to set a menu item, I could choose a page on another site. So here's the Doane webinar sandbox if I wanted to. So that's kind of a nice feature, to use the same content and publish it in a variety of different sites. We're going to choose page A. We'll just save it. You can also set a default page for children of this term. So if I selected this and I hadn't set up a specific page for A1 or A2 or A3, it would just default to whatever I'd set up at page A. But I'm going to go through and choose my pages for each of my nodes. One thing to know here, you can only associate to pages. So if you have a search site set up, you couldn't associate to the search site. You'd have to set up a page and then publish the search to that page as a web part. But we're going to go through, and sorry if this is a tad bit tedious. And that's actually good enough. We'll just, I think, C1 already set up, so that's good news. Make sure these are set. Okay, so we've got that saved. So now this term set is primed to be used for managed navigation. So we'll return to our managed navigation example subsite. And now we're going, so here's our old, this is the structural navigation. I'm just going to switch both to managed navigation. And this is similar to when you set up a column. When you do that, you're going to get this window into the term store. And we'll go to our managed navigation term set. And now we're all set. And you can see the navigation has changed, and it's pretty cool. On the left hand, we have the current navigation. Here we'll mouse over. This is page A of my site. Exciting, it worked. you see the friendly navigation, or the friendly URLs are in place. And we also, here's the global navigation. You can see it actually works with a drop-down. And we go to page A1. And it's that simple, pretty cool. And the SEO, the link has that URL, but you can see up here in the URL, it's actually taking you to the page, the actual page that was created. So it's, in a way, the managed navigation is pointing you with a user-friendly URL, but it's kind of a redirect to the actual page. So that's going to be a cool way that you can use the term store and term sets to actually drive navigation on your site. And the last thing that I want to point out as far as the flexibility of it, go back to that managed navigation. Again, when I said earlier, if you want to change the structure of your site, it's really easy. You can go back to the term store. You can find the right link. And let's say, page A3 now belongs under C. It belongs under C for whatever reason. We simply just need to move this term. And we're going to move it here underneath C. So now page A3 is underneath page C. Let's go back to our site and refresh it. And you can see that the menu navigation structure has actually changed. So it's much simpler than doing it with simply structural navigation. So,
hey Mark, this is my
yes.
quick question.
Sure.
Would custom sort, would you be able to apply custom sort there as well? In other words, put the A3 page below the C1 page if you like, by doing a custom sort on the term set?
Let's try it.
Well, that
seems like a good question.
I think it's just going to be at that primary level.
Yes, we can do it at the primary level. We'll save that.
Mm-hmm.
So now C should be at. Let's see if that's saved for me. Try that again. I'm going to refresh my term store and try one more time, and then we will move on. But I believe the answer is going to be yes. But let's try it one more time. Okay, I think we had success that time, so let's go back. Refresh. Yep, so that's a really good question, Mike, and that sort of integrates two of the things we talked about today. Here's how you can use custom sort to change the order of your managed navigation as well. Okay, so our next topic is search refiners. And in our webinar last week, we looked at our search refiners, and we really showed the benefits of, here's our out-of-the-box SharePoint search, and here's the SharePoint search once we've set up our taxonomy, our term sets, as refiners. So SharePoint Saturday, I can filter by sponsors or venues or schedule or the city or the conference location. So that has a lot of benefits. Remember, it's giving your users an Amazon-style search inside of SharePoint. But if you set up SharePoint, you set up a library, you set up your term sets, you tag documents, and you set up an enterprise search center, this is what you're going to get. And in fact, you won't even have the document counts. So how do we get from here, and pretend we're not seeing the document counts, to here where we have term sets and document counts? So how do we set up those refiners? And the way we're going to do that is the first thing you have to do is set up your term sets or your terms as managed properties so that they can then be set up as refiners in the search. And we're in SharePoint Online, so everything you see here is going to be a little bit easier on-premise. There's just a few things you have to be aware of on SharePoint Online. So that's what we'll take a look at. We're going to go back to site settings at the root of our site collection. And under site settings, you want to go to search schema. So search and then schema. And within the search schema, it's going to give you a list of all your managed properties and all your crawled properties. And what we need to do is set up our terms as managed properties. So you can see back in our search, we have the Sharepoint Saturday documents and the conference location. Those are already set up. What we don't have is that webinar column, the one we set up last week with the basic, advanced, beginner, the terms that we did the custom sort on. So that's what we want to set up as a new refiner to illustrate this. So back at our properties. Now the thing you have to be aware of for SharePoint Online is you can't create new refinable properties. In on-premise, you'll be able to do that, but in SharePoint Online, what they've done is they've given you a set of properties that you can use, and those are called refinable string. So these are kind of just templatized that are set up for you to borrow. So we're going to search for refinable string, and that's going to give us our list. And you can see there's 100 results. So there's a lot of these available to you. If you're worried about using too many of these for SharePoint Online, it should go into your planning, but there's 100 different strings you can use to set up your own managed properties. If you're on premise, you're just going to create a new managed property and really follow the same process. So we want to click on refinable string. And again, this is the same thing you're going to see with SharePoint on-premise. The difference is on SharePoint on-premise, you're actually able to edit a lot of these properties. In SharePoint Online, they're locked. But what you want to do is you'd want to choose type text. I'd recommend doing it searchable. Unfortunately, that's one's not available to us for SharePoint Online. But if it's searchable, then if you do a keyword search and it matches that metadata string, it'll bring back content that's tagged with that. But the key is this refinable, and you want that to be set as yes, active. Then we're going to go down, and once you have a managed property, you need to map it to a crawled property. Now the SharePoint search index is going through all of our libraries and it's crawling the various columns, so that SharePoint Saturday that we set up last week, it's crawled this webinar column, and that's now a crawled property. So we simply come here and let's see what I'm missing here. It's not letting me add a crawled property. I'm going to go back. Okay, let me make sure I was at the correct route. That's one thing I found out is you couldn't add a crawled property when you weren't at the appropriate spot in the site settings. So again, we're going to look for a refinable string. And that's always the risk, because Mike has warned me of doing a webinar live. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go back to one that we've already set up. And actually, what I may need to do let's just go to one we've already set up for the sake of time. So we'll go to our refinable string. And one thing you'll see is that we've set up an alias. So that alias is going to drive what you're going to everything. It's going to show up as refinable string 01, so you need to remember about that, but the alias is what it will show up in the actual interface. So you're going to set up the alias. Again, if you're on premise, you wouldn't need the alias. You just set this up as the name. And then down here, again, you're going to map this managed property to a crawled property. One thing to be aware of, the crawled property, you want to choose the one that says OWS in front of it. If you don't, when you do the refiners, you're going to actually see the unit with the term, so the database unit in the refiner, and that's not going to look very good. If you choose the OWS, you just get the term name, so that's much nicer. So with that in mind, and we'll pretend that worked for us, but what we're going to do is go back to our search, and we'll use our before search to give you the example. We're not going to be able to set up that new one as a refiner, but here we're on a before search. We're going to go to settings and edit the page. And it's a good idea to have already done a search so that the refinement shows up as a web part. Let's try that one more time. So we'll do a search for Sharepoint Saturday. Okay, so we'll go back to edit a page. And now we have the refinement. So we're going to choose this refinement and edit the web part. And then here on the right-hand side, you're going to have your various options. What you want to do is choose your refiners in the web part. And what that is going to bring up is a window with a list of the crawled or the managed properties that we can choose from. And it's working on it. So here on the left-hand side, we're going to see our available refiners. You don't want to look for your alias name. You actually want to look for refinable string. Here's refinable string 01. And you can see here's the name of the alias. We can see what our refiners are going to look like. So we just add that, and we'll add refinable string 2. That was 00. Here's 01. And move these up to the top of the list. Now we save that. We're going to apply it. Close this out. And we'll check this back in. And now we can see these refiners are set up. And you can see that refinable string 01s, I think we actually need to go back in and adjust that to make it show the alias as the name. I think we have time to do that, Mike, so I'm going to show that. So we'll edit that web part. One thing I'll point out, with SharePoint Online, they were pushing new features. So you do see use the refinement configuration defined in the managed navigation term set. That's a newer feature that we may explore in a future webinar, but I think it allows you to drive some of these refiners based on what you've set up in the term store. So those are some features we'll be exploring in the future and hopefully have on another webinar. But just in case you're wondering what that menu item is. Okay, so there was my issue. Here I can actually choose my display name. So I can make that whatever I want. And I'll do that. And I'm just going to say this, conference location. Apply it, click OK. And here we go. Now the labels appear as we want them to. Now we'll check this page back in. So that's how you're going to set up the refiners. Now the last thing to note, this isn't too complex, but it's sort of buried in SharePoint, is out of the box you don't get these document counts. So you may want to know how to set those up. And the way to do that is, again, we're going to go back to our site settings at the root. And this time we want to go to Web Designer Galleries and Master Pages. Then within Master Pages, you're going to choose Display Templates. And finally, within Display Templates, we're going to choose Filters. Like I said, not complex, but just difficult to find. The one we're interested in is Filter Default HTML. What you want to do is download that. So check out that file. I just saved it to my desktop. And simply open it in Notepad or whatever your favorite text editor is. And here at the top, you're going to see the options, and the one we care about is Show Counts. And by default, it's going to be false. That's why we're not seeing the counts. You just want to replace the word false with the word true. And you save it, and you come back to SharePoint, and just check it back into this library. And at that point, now you're going to see the counts. So that's the way to set up the refiners for SharePoint Search out of the box. A few notes is...
Hey, Mark.
Yes, Mike.
How soon is this recording going to be available?
This recording will be available tomorrow.
Because there's no way that I'm remembering how to do all this.
Yeah, so again, that's a great point. This is recorded, so you can come check and see the paths that I clicked on. Again, not difficult to do, but kind of complex to find the right spot to go. So thanks for bringing that up, Mike. The last point is, some people wonder, can you display the hierarchy of your taxonomy within the SharePoint refiners? The answer to that is no, not out of the box. And I think a big reason for that is, for these refiners, you're actually pointing to a crawlable property, which is crawling a column. So it's refining based on a column, which is a flat list. If we go here, it's not refining based on the managed metadata terms. And again, hopefully that's something that gets addressed in a future feature, or if you want to use a third-party web part, you can do that. But out of the box, you can't use the hierarchy of the taxonomy to filter. So the very last thing we're going to do before the Q&A is talk about, I want to show you one of the web parts that you can use to display content in SharePoint that's actually driven by search. So use case for this, I'm going to go to this dynamic content page. Let's say we're back talking about SharePoint Saturday again, and we want to set up a page on our SharePoint site about the SharePoint Saturdays in various locations, so we have all the content for that location on one page. Now, if you didn't have the dynamic content search web part, or the content search web part, you'd have to manually add content to each page, and you'd have to manage that page over time. So as new content was created, you'd need to go back and update that. Luckily, now there's a better way, and you can do it with SharePoint. You can create a content on page that's actually driven by a search query. So the way we're going to do that is, on our page, we're going to edit our page and go to Insert a Web Part. And the web part we're interested in is the content is under Content Rollup. And there's two that are worth knowing about. One is Content Query and one is Content Search. They're very similar web parts as far as displaying content based on a search query. The content search web part is much more powerful. It also does a better job of letting you customize your query, and it lets you pull in content across different sites. So we want to do content search. I'll show you the content search. So we're going to add that web part to our page. Once the web part is there, it's just going to do, it has a default search that's basically bringing back the most recent content that's been added to the site. But what we're actually interested in is content that's been tagged with the term Cincinnati. So this is our Cincinnati page. So we're going to come over and edit our web part. And when you edit the web part, you have a few options. You can decide how many items you want to show. You can just say what format you want it to display in. Do we want picture? Do we want lists, et cetera, et cetera. But what we're interested in for the purposes today is just looking at what that query is. So we're going to click on Change Query. And this is going to let me set up what content do I want to show up on this page. So the use case, again, is we want to set up a page where somebody can come to Cincinnati and see the Cincinnati page and see all the content that's related to Cincinnati. So here you can see the default is just recently changed items. I'm going to change that to documents. We can restrict it based on current sites or current site locations or a URL, so there's ways you can restrict that content. Here you can restrict it based on a tag. And the tag we want to do, and there's a few options here which are pretty cool. One, if we had actually set up a page called Cincinnati in our managed navigation, we could simply say restrict by navigation term of the current page. So that in that case, Cincinnati is not only a navigation term, it's also a tag, and it's going to automatically populate. And you can also use the hierarchy here in this case to, if we had chosen North America to use our example, it's going to show, from last week, it's going to show all the terms that are tagged with North America or any of the child pages. But we're keeping it a little simple today. We're just going to choose our term set. You can see this is actually linked to our managed metadata terms. I'm going to choose Cincinnati, our location. There's other options. You can extend this, add other refiners to it, do other settings. For the sake of time, we're going to kind of keep it basic today. But here's our search results preview. These are the two documents that we have that are tagged to Cincinnati. So again, we're going to save it and apply these changes. And now this page has the query set up, so when somebody comes to it, it's going to display documents that have been tagged to Cincinnati. And why that's powerful is that you're making the page more dynamic. Instead of static content, you can manage your content in a single location and then set up these pages to publish the content that you're interested in displaying to users of that page. You can do audience targeting as well. So it's a great way to build up your Sharepoint so that it's changing over time. And again, if I want to add a new document, I don't have to come to this page. I would just go back to my library, check in a new document, tag it as Cincinnati, and it's going to show up here. So the users of that page are getting fresh content all the time. So that closes another loop. Last week we showed how you can use the managed metadata to filter documents actually within a library. We looked at how you can use the managed metadata to allow users to filter their search results. And here's an example of how you can use the search and managed metadata to dynamically present content or target content to users on a certain page. Really, really powerful web part. Yes?
Just as a foreshadowing for next week, is that population that you see at the bottom a custom property?
That is. So custom properties are something we're going to talk about a little bit more next week, and this is an example of how we created a custom property of population for the term Cincinnati, and we're displaying it on the page. Next week we'll show how you can actually do some filtering of content or searching based on those custom properties. That wraps up our content today. We're going to take a breather, and Mike and I are going to, we have about 5 minutes left, so we're going to open up some of these questions and answer some of them. And again, if you have questions that we don't get to, type them in. We'll get these written out and provide the answers with the recording tomorrow. So Mike, the first question, we have a few questions about, was the webinar last week recorded? The answer is yes. I'll include a link to the recording of last week's webinar with this week's webinar as well. so people can go back and review both. So here's a question related to last week about the managed navigation web part within the library. Can you, and we can go look at that. The question is, can you add content type as a filter for this managed navigation? And that's what this is, the managed navigation web part. And I believe that you can add content type. You can also add folders. There's a few other functions that you can add as filters to that web part. Mike, here's a question I'll let you field. How are permissions given for access to the term store? Do all site owners have access, or how do you control who can plug into the term store?
You just go into the term store and you go into the term set or the term itself, and you can control permissions there. My advice on that is start simple. Don't try to get too complex with allowing permissions. I've seen cases where clients got really excited about controlling down to the term level, and it gets kind of messy. My advice always is just start with a few groups. You do it through your through Active Directory, and you can assign, or you can assign it. I just typically go in once we've created a governance team and governance committee kind of thing, and find out who's involved. You can just type that person's name into the properties panel, and you can do that. We'll cover that next week in the governance session, but it's fairly simple to do. It can, like many things in SharePoint, it can get complex really fast and get complicated really fast and out of control. So it's best governed use is through a governance policies around that, and we'll talk more about that next week. We'll show you next week as well.
Thanks, Mike. A good question about the managed navigation. How would you add a document library or list to the left navigation? So as I mentioned, you can only do pages. So the way you can do that is, here's an example from our webinar last week. We have SharePoint Saturday as one of these navigation items, and I click on this and you see library content. This is actually just a page, and if I go to edit the page, you'll see that it's just the library content is here's a web part on this specific page. It's displaying that web part, the content from the library on this page. So that's the way you're going to want to get around that to get the content you want on the specific page. And we'll do one more question, which is really a comment that was helping me out. The problem I was having with the content search, it says that I was clicking on the wrong search schema in the site settings to set up that web part. So let's actually go investigate that so that people can get the answers that they need. Yep, that's a great point to be aware of. So what I had done, and the reason I couldn't make my edits, is I went to search and schema. What we really wanted to do was go to search schema under site collection administration. So thank you to our viewer who pointed that out. So now if we go to refinable string, I can probably make the edits that I want. Some of them are still going to be static fields, but we can see I can now enter an alias, and I'm actually able to add a mapping here. So sometimes that stuff happens on webinars, but I think that's a good illustration of making sure that you go to the right spot in the site collection administration instead of just the search schema. And that's going to be the difference between being able to make the changes that you want and being frustrated on your webinar. And here's where we would do the crawled property name. Again, we can search for webinar to get the column we want. And here's the example. We want to choose this OWS. So you don't want to choose webinar column. You don't want to choose OWS tax ID. Just choose this OWS, and that'll get you the refiner you need. So Mike, we're about 2 minutes after, so I think we're going to wrap it up today. We want to thank you for joining and doing a great job presenting. I want to thank our audience for attending today. We hope it was a valuable hour. As you leave, there's going to be a survey. We'd appreciate if you fill it out. And we hope you'll join us next week as the last in our series, which is going to be Managed Metadata 301, where we'll do a few more advanced features, specifically the custom properties, but then we're going to spend a lot of time talking about how to govern your taxonomy in Sharepoint, which is a really, really important topic.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everybody, and we hope to see you next week.